where we left off was where the that I wanted to farm as an occupation, and that's my dream, and that's all I had going for me was to keep farming and working with my dad and so forth. And all of a sudden, I got to a point in my life where I had a girlfriend that I was going with about a year, and she only lived about 2 miles from our house. And I used to go over there to visit her on a bicycle and on a horse in the wintertime. And then we dated with my dad's pickup, and a neighbor guy was with us, and he would have a girlfriend, and we double dated, and this and that. And I was friends, we were getting pretty steady, and I ended up, this is a hard one to put in place, but I want to say that I'm 20 and a half years old at the time, and my sister worked in Dickinson, and my parents would go up to Dickinson every weekend and take my Betty out, and they would go out for dinner and dance, or they would just go to a show, and then Betty would bring a boyfriend home, and Betty would come home, my sister, and they would spend Sunday with us. This would only happen on Saturday nights when Betty had off Sunday, and she worked full-time at a drugstore in Dickinson. So turns out that my dad would bring Betty's boyfriends home after they went out nightclubbing. Well, one day in June, it rained, and I was over at Georgene's house with a bicycle, and it rained so hard you could not drive that bicycle home. It would be impossible because the mud would plug up the fenders. So they said, "Why don't you stay at my house?" And I said, "Okay." And then tomorrow morning, the sun would come out, and it would dry off, and you could drive on the road, and I could go home. So I did that. Stayed overnight. Next morning, I come home with my bicycle. I drive in the yard, and I find my dad working in the shop, and he says, "Where were you?" And I says, "I was over at Gullickson's." And he knew where that was. That's my girlfriend. And he says, "Well, if you do that again, stay overnight, then you can just stay there and don't come back. Don't." I said, "What?" He says, "Well, if you want to do that again, if you stay overnight again, you don't come back. I don't want you." I said, why can you have Betty's boyfriend stay with us and I can't stay over there when I can't even get home? with my bicycle, I would have to walk and all that dumb stuff. And you just keep bringing these guys home with Betty, and I can't do the same thing. Well, he says, that's different. And I said, what is the difference? He says, it's just different. And of course, meaning that he didn't trust or whatever. I can't imagine. So I said to him, if that's different and I can't do it again, and I know that it ain't any difference, I'm going to do it again if the same situation happens. And so I may as well go right now. And he says, you're, I don't know what you're talking about. You can't do that. And I said, yes, I can. And I says, if you say that, I'm doing that. And then he just walked off, and I turned around and I walked over to the house, and I went up and got my clothes that I could carry, my work shoes, and I left, and I never came back. And my mom says, you're going to get cut off the will. You will get a thing. I says, I don't care. I stayed home here with you, Mom. Since I was 17, 18 years old, I wanted to leave because I wasn't getting treated right. And I don't like it, and I always wanted to leave, and you always were pregnant, and you had a baby in diapers, and you begged me to stay. And I did for you, and right now, you don't have no more kids in diapers, and you're not pregnant. And so I'm going. And she says, okay. And she cried, and I left. So I walked off the place, and I never come back until 6 months later. I was going to be drafted when I'm 21 years old. And I wanted to get married before I left. And I so much as wanted to do it, all the different reasons are beside the point now, but I couldn't get married till I was 21. And I got drafted exactly 30 days later. That was my drafting period. So I got my license when I was 21, and I got married the very next day. And before I could get married, I was a Catholic, and I wanted to get married in church. I was a Christian. I wanted to keep my faith. So I went to the priest. He said, I told him this story. I told him this story. He says, well, I want you to go home and apologize to your dad for leaving home and ask him for your permission, for his permission to marry, his blessing, so to speak. And so he says, otherwise, I don't want to do it. Can you do that? And I said, yeah, I'll do that. So I went home. He wasn't even at home. He was still in town like he normally is. And I waited for him. He came home. I apologized. He says, okay, come on in. And we talked. I told him we're getting married and this and that. Okay, yeah, that's okay with me. Yeah. And so I got married and I left home. And then I went in the Army. And I went there 2 years, came back from the Korean War, went, I took my wife, we went over to my folks' house, we stayed there 2 nights. I got up the third night, or the third morning, and he was sitting at the table, and he said, "Well, Leonard, what are you going to do now that you're out of the Army? What are you going to do for a living? And you're married and got it. What's your plan?" I said, "Well, I don't have an education. I love to farm. I always wanted to farm. I know how to farm, and I'd want to farm. That's what I'd like to do." Well, he says, "If you want to farm, you're going to have to go out and find yourself a farm because there ain't room for 2 families to live on this farm." And I says, "Well, how can I farm? First, I don't have any machinery. I don't have any money to buy it. And I don't have a farm, and I don't have money to buy that." I says, I can't even imagine how that could possibly work. And he says, "Well, why don't you go to school instead? If you go to school, you can get paid. You can go under the GI Bill, and they pay you to go to school." Well, you couldn't live on that. And I said, "What school can I go to if I don't have a high school education to even enter?" And he says, "Well, go to agriculture school in Fargo, North Dakota." Well, I'd be way away from home. I couldn't retrieve any help there or anything. And I don't want to go to school. I knew how to farm. I farmed all my life already, and whatever life I had. So he just wouldn't give in. He wouldn't say, "I'll help you." He wouldn't say, "Do this or that," or that was it. That was my alternative. So I went to Georgene. She was upstairs at the time in our house there. I says, "Pack up your clothes. I am leaving North Dakota and I ain't coming back." And boy, I'll tell you what, I was gone that week, out of state. And then I wouldn't come back for years. But Georgene always wanted me to go back and visit and make up and forgive and forget. And she finally convinced me, but it took about 10 years. I had so much hate and anger in my heart, I could hardly, it just kept gnawing away at me. And my life changed when I went home and said, "Okay, I'm done. I don't know why you did this," and I didn't talk about it. Nobody talked about that subject. I just went back and they said, "Come in," and it all went away. And I forgave him. I just said, "I don't know why he did it, and I'm not going to be the judge. I cannot be the judge. I don't know what he went through. I don't know how he could do that." And when he died, he took everything with him too. So it never changed. So to this day, I got no help. And I was the only kid in all 8 kids that stayed home that many years and worked for him when he needed the help the most. And no thank you, no nothing. But, you know, I'm completely at peace right now, simply because we don't know what's in the plan. We don't know why he was such a judgmental guy or whatever. And so I'm not going to be the judge. He might be right and I may be wrong, but I'm not going to worry about it. So that's about how I got here. Then I just struggled here. I couldn't get a job for a whole year. I only got part-time work for $1 an hour as a janitor. It was a recession time after the Korean War, and there was no jobs available unless you had experience in something. And I had no education as well. So I went to a machine shop school and learned how to make things out of metal. And I became a machinist, a tool and die man. And I was good at it. I could do numbers, and I was a mechanically minded person. And then I got a job from the school, referred me to a job, and from that day on, in one more year after that, I had 2 jobs the rest of my life at the same time. And I worked and saved like crazy. Wouldn't buy TV, telephone, no nothing. Until we can pay cash for it and we got money in the savings. I want to get started in a business. I want to show my father that I can do it without his help. And I did. And that's where I'm at. I don't get, that's just part of that story. Well, at that point, when I left home the first time, then I did move in with Georgene and her family. And I got a job in a seismograph, oil-producing seismograph job. And then I got drafted. I only had that job for 6 months. And then I got drafted. Then I went in the Army, and Georgene stayed there. And when I courtshiped Georgene, and after that, in the wintertime, our dating would be a lot of times on horseback. And we would go to neighbors, visit, just so we could be together and do something. Then other times when the roads were permissible, we would go with a car. And we went out and danced and went to movies. We didn't ever eat out. That was out of our... we didn't have money for all of it, is what it amounted to. And then when we got married, then in 6 months, but the whole courtship was done wintertime on horseback and summertime on, bicycle, car, Yeah, yeah, yeah. I left home and I'm living with her family. And at that time, I come home every night. But in the daytime, I would work on that seismograph company that was looking for oil, testing all the lands around. And then from there, I went straight to the service. And then 2 years gone. Just letter every day.